Imagine you're a farmer in Nigeria. You grow soybeans. You sell them to a buyer in China. The deal is negotiated in US dollars. The contract is written in US dollars. The bank transfer clears in US dollars. And neither of you, not the Nigerian farmer, not the Chinese buyer, ever set foot in America. That's not a coincidence. That's a system. A system built over 80 years, quietly, deliberately, and with a level of financial engineering that most people never think about, because it was designed so that you wouldn't have to. The US dollar is in roughly 88% of every foreign exchange transaction on Earth. Every single day, about $7 trillion worth of currency gets traded globally. The dollar is on one side of almost 9 trillion of those dollars. The euro, the second most traded currency in the world, doesn't even come close. So the question isn't whether the dollar dominates. It clearly does. The real question is, how did this happen, and what does it actually cost the rest of the world? Because this story is stranger, older, and more uncomfortable than most people realize. Let's go back to 1944. World War II is still happening. The Allied victory isn't certain, but it's starting to look probable. And a group of economists and finance ministers from 44 countries gather at a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to answer a very specific question. When this war ends, how do we rebuild the global economy? Europe is in ruins. Trade has collapsed. Currencies are worthless. Nobody trusts anybody's money. They needed an anchor, something stable, something every country could price their goods against without worrying that the value would evaporate overnight. And the United States made them an offer. America had emerged from the war as the only major economy that wasn't bombed into rubble. It held about 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. Its factories were intact. Its military was dominant. And it said, essentially, use our dollar. We'll back it with gold. 1 ounce of gold equals $35. You can always exchange your dollars for gold at that rate. We promise. The world said yes. And just like that, the US dollar became the world's reserve currency. Every other country pegged their currency to the dollar. The dollar was pegged to gold. The whole system rested on America's credibility. It was a remarkable moment of international trust, or, depending on how you look at it, a remarkable moment of leverage. Now here's where it gets interesting. Having the world's reserve currency sounds great in theory, but what does it actually mean in practice? It means that when any two countries want to trade, Brazil and Japan, Ghana and South Korea, Vietnam and Saudi Arabia, they don't exchange their own currencies directly. They convert into dollars first, because dollars are what everyone accepts. Dollars are what everyone holds in reserve. This creates demand for dollars that has nothing to do with the American economy itself. Countries hold dollars not because they love America, but because they need dollars to buy oil, to pay debts, to settle international contracts. The dollar is the language of global commerce. And here is the uncomfortable part. When you are the country that issues the world's reserve currency, you get to do something no one else can do. You get to run a permanent trade deficit and have the rest of the world essentially finance it. Think about what a trade deficit means. You import more than you export. You spend more than you earn. For any other country, that's a crisis. That means your currency weakens, your debt becomes expensive, and eventually you face the kind of IMF austerity package that guts public services and sends people into the streets. But for the US, other countries need dollars, so they buy US Treasury bonds. They park their savings in American debt. They lend money to America at very low interest rates, permanently. The economist Barry Eichengreen called this the exorbitant privilege. Charles de Gaulle, the French president, used that phrase first, and he was furious about it. He understood that the dollar system meant America could print money, buy real goods from the rest of the world, and hand back pieces of paper that everyone was obligated to accept. De Gaulle actually started converting France's dollar reserves into gold in the 1960s. He was making a point. America noticed. Then, in 1971, the whole first act of the story collapses. Nixon goes on television, calm, casual, almost like he's announcing a minor scheduling change, and he tells the world that the United States is suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Just like that, the promise made in 1944 is gone. The dollar is no longer backed by anything physical. It's backed by the full faith and credit of the US government, which is a formal way of saying, trust us. And here's the absurd part. The dollar didn't collapse, it got stronger. Because by 1971, the global economy was so deeply built around the dollar, trade contracts, oil pricing, debt instruments, foreign reserves, that nobody could simply opt out. There was no exit. The infrastructure of global commerce was dollar-shaped, and reshaping it would have been like trying to change the gauge of every railroad track on Earth simultaneously. So countries kept using the dollar, even after the gold backing disappeared, even after the promise was broken. If that isn't a remarkable feat of institutional inertia, nothing is. But Nixon needed to make sure the dollar's dominance survived without gold backing it, and this is where the story gets its most interesting chapter. In 1974, the US struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. The details were secret for decades, but the arrangement was this. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in US dollars. OPEC would follow. In return, America would provide military protection and weapons to the Saudis. Oil became the new gold, because every country in the world needs oil, and oil can only be bought in dollars. Every country in the world needs to hold dollars. The petrodollar system was born, and it worked beautifully for America. Every barrel of oil sold anywhere on Earth, from the North Sea to the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Mexico, generated dollar demand. Countries had to earn dollars or buy dollars just to keep their economies running. The US, meanwhile, could print those dollars and use them to buy the oil itself. The machine was self-reinforcing. Dollar demand kept interest rates low for the US. Low interest rates meant cheap borrowing. Cheap borrowing meant America could run large deficits without paying the price that any other country would pay. It's not a conspiracy, it's just a very, very favorable position to be in. Now zoom out for a moment and look at what this system has actually produced. The US national debt is currently above $34 trillion. That number is so large it has stopped feeling real to most people. It's almost twice the size of China's entire economy. In a normal world, that level of debt would destroy a currency. Interest rates would spike, inflation would spiral, investors would flee. But the US can carry this debt in part because the rest of the world continues to buy it. Foreign governments and central banks hold trillions in US Treasury bonds. They do this because the dollar is the reserve currency. They hold the reserve currency because global trade demands it, and global trade demands it because everyone else is doing it. This is the circular logic at the heart of dollar dominance. It persists not because it's the best system. It persists because changing it requires a coordination among rivals that has so far proven impossible. But cracks are forming, and they're worth paying attention to. China has been quietly pushing the yuan as an alternative. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a growing list of others, have talked openly about creating a new reserve currency, or at least settling trades in local currencies. Russia, cut off from the dollar system by sanctions, has been forced to accelerate its own de-dollarization. Saudi Arabia, the country that built the petrodollar, has started accepting yuan for oil sales to China. These are small moves. The yuan makes roughly 2.5% of global foreign exchange reserves. The dollar is still around 58%. The gap is enormous. But in 1944, the British pound was the world's dominant currency. The idea that it would be replaced within a single decade would have seemed absurd. History doesn't announce transitions in advance. Here's what the dollar's dominance actually costs the world, quietly, every day. When the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to fight inflation inside the United States, dollar-denominated debt around the world becomes more expensive to service. Countries that borrowed in dollars, which is most of them, suddenly find their debt payments rising, not because of anything they did, but because of a decision made in Washington for American reasons. This has happened repeatedly. The Volcker shock of the early 1980s, when the Fed hiked rates to 20%, triggered debt crises across Latin America. The taper tantrum of 2013, when the Fed simply suggested it might slow bond purchases, caused capital to flee emerging markets almost instantly. The dollar is a domestic currency with an international footprint, and that footprint lands on everyone else. So, where does this leave us? The dollar's dominance isn't eternal. Nothing in financial history is. The Romans had the denarius, the Dutch had the guilder, the British had the pound. All of them at their peak seemed permanent. None of them were.
What makes the dollar different is that it's not backed by an empire in the traditional sense. No territorial conquest, no colonial extraction in the classic form. It's backed by something more abstract: inertia, network effects, and the absence of a credible alternative. The moment a credible alternative appears, and there are people in Beijing, in Brussels, and in Riyadh working on exactly that, the transition could be faster than anyone expects. Or it could take another 50 years. Nobody actually knows. What we do know is this: for now, a farmer in Nigeria sells soybeans to a buyer in China, and somewhere in the middle, an American bank takes a small piece of every transaction, not through force, not through law, just through the quiet architecture of a system built in a New Hampshire hotel in 1944, and maintained through deals, through leverage, and through the sheer weight of habit ever since. The dollar rules the world. The real question is, for how much longer does the world let it?